thank everybody for being here this afternoon. I know everybody wants to get out of town. I know the committee members want to get out of town, and we'll do everything we can to accommodate them. We are probably going to have one other full committee meeting unless something comes up that we have to address, which will probably be next Tuesday. And then after crossover day, we will probably meet to deal with some of the issues that have been introduced, but we haven't had time to get to, but trying to get a head start on next year. And so if you have a bill that has been introduced in the committee and that has not yet had a hearing, there's still an opportunity, even though it may not move this year, but that we will at least have some hearings after crossover day. We're going to start with House Bill 94. Chuck Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, bring to you House Bill 94, Committee Substitute LC 344479S. Those of you that heard about this bill in subcommittee will recall that the genesis of this was a situation where a young man went into the military, deregistered his motor vehicle, turned his tag in, and basically parked his motor vehicle for 4 years. Upon coming out of the service, he went to re-register his vehicle, bought a new tag, was informed that he owed 4 years ad valorem tax because apparently the taxing authorities track ad valorem taxes on motor vehicles by your tag registration. So when he deregistered and ceased to get an annual renewal on his tag, he was not billed for that 4 years of ad valorem taxes, but he said, I understand the taxing principles, tell me how much I owe, but then he was penalized for penalties for non-payment of those ad valorem taxes for 4 years. So when I brought the bill, Mr. Chairman, it was to give protection to members of the military so that they could not be penalized for non-payment of ad valorem taxes. When the bill came through subcommittee, there was interest in looking at other similar situations, so the committee substitute that you have in front of you basically broadens the protections I was seeking for the members of the military to say if for any reason you own a motor vehicle and you're not going to drive it on the public roads of Georgia, i.e. you've got an older vehicle, you're restoring, it's out of service for several years, if it too falls off of the radar screen of the taxing authorities, when you do re-register that vehicle and you are at that time told to pay the ad valorem taxes in arrears, that you would not be penalized. The principle being that if you own real property and you're not properly invoiced and told that you owe taxes on it, that it's not appropriate to penalize you for not paying taxes that you were not billed for. So that is the crux of the bill. Be glad to entertain questions.
Let's come through everyone. Yes, sir.
Did this come through your subcommittee, Brett?
Yes, sir.
Let me just ask a question of the chair of the subcommittee. The do not operate is kind of like a question of fact. I thought the operative thing that you were looking at was deregistering the vehicle, and if it had been deregistered, then you aren't supposed to operate it anyway. But I thought it was deregistering that was the operative factor rather than having a question of fact of, oh no, I haven't driven this vehicle in the last 6 years. I'm just curious as to whether this doesn't open up a lot of he said, she said kind of things.
I believe
What's your number?
11.
Okay.
I believe the term deregistered may have caused a little confusion as well, but the do not operate basically is when a motorist does not renew their tag, so there wouldn't be a valid tag on the vehicle. So they're at that period, for whatever period of time someone doesn't operate their vehicle on the road, they haven't purchased a valid tag. So in addition to the military, as Representative Williams was trying to address, other situations could be sometimes people take a car off the road, do not renew their tag for a period of years when they're restoring it, you know, an antique vehicle or a custom vehicle. So they would still accumulate that ad valorem tax due, and at such time as they reauthorize the tag to put it back on the road and have a valid tag, then they would pay those accumulated ad valorem taxes, but not pay any penalty or interest.
And I understand and I agree with all of that. My question is, if we just say, I haven't driven my vehicle, that becomes either a swearing contest or a he said, she said,
Right.
rather than something where you deregister or you surrender your tag or you surrender your registration. And so there has been some operative thing where you have not only made the statement, I'm not going to register it or not going to drive it, but legally you cannot drive it. And I mean, I'm just wondering if you aren't going to get into an argument about, well, I think I saw you driving it last Tuesday. No, I wasn't driving it. That was somebody else. Or I'm just asking the question. Who's 12? Chuck? Okay. Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a similar question, and I think Representative Williams, in his attempt to help some of us on the committee, one of those was myself, who had asked him to have this apply to all Georgians, not just military members. I'm looking back at his original bill, and he clarified it a little bit more. He said in his original, his Georgia resident who is a member of the military and is stationed out. So I think we may have inadvertently put him in this position, but that was the reason I had my button pressed earlier, was to ask about that particular question, and also ask if the chair or Representative Williams could remind me what 48.5.441.1 was.
That is
I think this is TAVT.
that is
Okay.
TAVT.
Okay. So I guess maybe we can, if the chairs of the body, I would like to try to help the gentleman, but I know we're in the posture with the chairman's rules about amending bills here in full committee, so I'll yield to your wisdom if we're going to try to repair it or
Not
next
here.
Tuesday.
Not here.
Yes, sir.
Representative Pete. Okay. I don't, we're going to move your bill, but I want to make sure we move it right. And I would suggest, if the committee, if somebody wants to make the motion, that we send it back to subcommittee to put in some standard, whether it's deregister, surrender the registration, or something that says that in that case you still owe the ad valorem taxes, but just not saying that you don't drive it.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there a second? All right, there's a motion and a second to send it back to subcommittee.
Thanks, sir.
Is there all in favor of sending it back to subcommittee, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll fix it between now and next Tuesday and have it back in full committee.
Sound like a plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, House Bill 200, Chairman Parsons.
Thanks, Chairman. There's currently
What's your number?
27.
Okay.
There currently is an income tax credit on statute for the installation of a electric charging equipment that's now in code as to be used for a business enterprise. Now, either through a definition in code or an interpretation of that turns out to be a manufacturing entity, and there's no annual cap. There is no sunset currently in code. What this legislation does, it puts an annual cap on the amount of money that can be used for this, and it also puts a sunset on it, which is not there currently. And it defines the business as a business enterprise that would get this income tax credit, or the income tax credit would be a business enterprise or business engaged in the ownership or operation of commercial office, residential, retail, or industrial real property for the purchase or lease of each electric vehicle charger. And we also added compressed natural gas fueling appliance. That is a type of CNG fueling equipment that one would put in at their residence. It's my understanding this is not something that would be used very often. Wouldn't be very many of them purchased because it's a lot more infrastructure, a lot more expensive to put it in. But we've added that too because it is another type of low to no emission fuel for low emission vehicles. And there'd be a 10%. We've changed it from the 20% of the cost of the charger or compressed natural gas fueling appliance, or $2,500, whichever is less, until June 20th, 2018. Would be applicable for that, or 10% of the cost of the charger or compressed natural gas fueling appliance, or $2,500, whichever is less, from July 1st, 2018 until June 30th, 2020. There'd be an annual cap of $750,000, and no single taxpayer could get more than a tax credit greater than $150,000. And we have added in subcommittee language on page 2, lines 43 through 56, about the process that to get that tax credit. And I believe that's pretty much it, Mr.
Any questions of the author? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes out of committee. All right, House Bill 237. Representative Williamson, which number?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today the Angel Investor Tax Credit Bill, House Bill number 237, LC 344509S. This bill takes our current code and simply extends the sunset date an additional 5 years. There's no change in the cap or any other portion of the bill. It just simply extends the sunset date, and that language is lines 214 through lines 228 for 5 years. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the author? Hearing none, what's the pleasure? Well, we've got one. Representative Teasley.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Representative Williamson, what has there been? Where'd you go? There you are. What has been? Do we have any measure of success of how this program has been going?
It is coming in. It's a 2-year delay in capturing the data for the qualified businesses. And for example, you can see the 2011 the amount of qualified investment registered was 746,000. It jumped up to 2,055,000 in 2012. I do not have the 2013 data in yet, but it's significant interest. As we vetted in the 2 committee hearings, I like to use an illustration of the fact that this is that we talk a lot about transportation this session. But this is the bridge between friends and family money to the ongoing venture capital or bank financing or private equity money that a new technology company needs. So this pathway that this is a portion of the pathway that's commonly known as the Valley of Death for new businesses, and these people that come in with this private capital money, and we could revet the terms of what this program does, but the intention of this legislation is just to extend the sunset date, but this is working as intended by this body when the legislation was first enacted a few years ago.
And so I guess really the question I'm driving at is, I assume the goal here is to give us a little bit more data to be able to make a decision. Is this something we want to continue doing as a state?
Absolutely.
This gives us a little bit more time to do that.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Any other questions? What's the pleasure of committee? All right, there's a motion to pass. Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's passed. House Bill 275, Brian Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 275, and this bill goes to address debts that are owed to Georgia Lottery Corporation in our state. And currently, when a retailer defaults on monies that they owe the Georgia Lottery Corporation, the Georgia Lottery has to go hire outside counsel. As I said to the subcommittee, nothing against hiring lawyers to collect debts, but they have to go hire counsel and try to chase down money that's owed to the state. And the statistics I was given, it's an average of $4 million each year that is not paid to lottery corporations, owed to the lottery corporation from retailers. And the lottery corporation spends between $300,000 and $400,000 and to collect on average between $400,000 and $700,000 of that debt. And so what this bill does is it goes under OCGA 40A7161 and adds the lottery corporation as a claimant agency underneath that code section to allow Department of Revenue to offset tax refunds to help go towards this debt. And we have A through H already there, different departments to take advantage of this code section. This was requested by the Lottery Corporation and the Department of Revenue as well. And my theory on this is when you have folks that owe the state money, and of course you all know the Lottery Corporation makes a lot of money for our state, invests a lot of money in education for our state, that it makes sense to let the Department of Revenue offset tax refunds owed to folks that owe money to that department. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Representative Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Strickland, looks like a good measure, good bill. How rampant a problem is this? $4 million a year is, I mean, we're talking 100 retailers, 1,000 retailers. I mean, is this a
I think the number
150
to 200 retailers.
Is that right? Okay.
So it's a small number of bad actors, I guess, statewide. You could say that's a small number, but it ends up being a large number of a lot of money that's owed back.
Right, sure is. Yeah. No, good measure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a motion and a second to pass. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Passes on to rules.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. You missed your opportunity. House Bill 312. I think you're going to get a second bite at the apple here. House Bill 312. Chairman Tankersley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Today I bring to you House Bill 312, and we're operating off of LC 344459. This is a Department of Revenue bill to repeal the tax bonding requirements for tobacco manufacturers and importers. Under the current law, tobacco manufacturers, importers, and the distributors are required to file an annual performance bond of $1,000. They each pay a one-time $250 license fee and a $10 annual renewal fee thereafter. This bill just simply removes the annual performance bond requirement for the manufacturers and the importers because they don't have a tax liability. There is no need to secure a $10 renewal fee with a $1,000 performance bond. Tobacco distributors, however, do have an ongoing tax liability, and therefore their bond, performance bond of $1,000, will remain in place. This bill successfully passed the House and the Senate committees last year with no objections, but on the last day it did not reach the Senate floor. So I do ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 312. Thank you.
Chairman Martin.
Chairman Tankersley, why are you laughing? This is a serious question. This is not. Chairman Tankersley and I had a good conversation in regulated industries the other day with it. Seriously speaking, and this may go to revenue if the chair would allow it, but the bond that we're looking at, I guess it says not less than $1,000, so that's okay. So the distributors, the revenue can, I mean, $1,000 is just non-consequential, so you can get the appropriate amount. Yes, I'm seeing somebody. We don't need to do anything with the $1,000. I mean, I bet that hadn't been updated in a couple of years either.
Yeah, Chairman Martin, I don't think it's been updated, and it's probably older than I am, to be honest with you. But I think that there's really not a. I mean, we're fine with the.
Since it's not less than,
yeah.
I'm good. Thank you very much. Just so since we were here, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moore. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was Chairman Martin, that's the exact same question I had, but I want to further that question. If it's only is it typical for the department? This is a department question as well. Is it typical for the department?
If the department would come over here,
Yeah.
and so we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick Gardner, Legal Affairs and Tax Policy, Department of Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. So my question is guardians of the taxpayers' wallets here, and that was the original intention in this language in line 16, to in fact have a bond on those businesses that would ultimately have a tax liability to the state of Georgia. What bond amounts do you see? Are you just asking for simply $1,000? Are you asking the minimum for these distributors and that do have tax liabilities?
The bond amount is $1,000. That's what we require for distributors. We're not asking for that amount to be changed. I think it's very rare for one of these bonds even to be called, even for a distributor, assuming there is liability in this area. Since it's a small group of taxpayers, I mean, they're typically very compliant. If the department, if the committee would like some data, relative to, average amount of liability for these distributors, I'd certainly be happy to provide that. But I think from our standpoint, from an administrative standpoint, $1,000 is sufficient. But for the manufacturers and importers, there's just not a need.
Well, I would argue that. Wouldn't it be true that $1,000 is so insignificant it's not much worth the hassle of putting anyone through that? If it's really not that important, I don't even know why you're requiring such a minimum, de minimis bond amount. Either get it to what it's relative to, to the exposure to the state, or do away with it if it's in fact a de minimis exposure. So that's just a comment. Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments? And I think that Representative Williamson's point is well taken, and just request that maybe the department look at this, report back to us at some point in time. We're going to, I presume, proceed with the department's request that these other two be removed, but you might want to just look at the bonding requirement as far as the amount or whether it's even necessary for the distributors. And number 10 is Representative Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way I read this, it says not less than 1,000. Couldn't the department, if they saw fit and saw a need, couldn't they raise it on their own without having to come back for the statute, since the law says not less than 1,000?
Representative Hartman, I think that's accurate, and I would agree with that analysis. That if
you saw this was a problem, y'all would you could address it internally, couldn't you, through the regulations of trying to raise that?
Based on that language, I believe that we could. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks for pointing that out. What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a do pass and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It's passed to rules. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Governor's Floor Leader Chad Nimmer on House Bill 319.
That was my good knee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you today for your consideration House Bill 319, working off of LC 344473EC. This is simply the ratification bill for the executive order suspending motor fuel sales tax collections in the swing of fuel prices.
That it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just trying to ratify what the boss did.
I don't know, just because you're the governor's floor leader, I don't know that you can get by with that little bit of an explanation.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, your subcommittee vetted this thing out. They wore me out pretty good on it. So I felt due pass motion from them was good, but I'm be willing to take any questions, sir.
Well, I think Representative Harbin certainly has one for you.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was curious. You said that the subcommittee vetted this pretty well. Could you go over some of the questions they brought up and let us, so that we can see?
They were mainly wondering if a guy from South Georgia knew what ratify meant. That was the main question.
Well, that probably is a good question.
I went home and looked it up.
Get the critters in the barn.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Martin.
Representative Teague.
Representative Nimmer, I'm just kind of curious, if you failed on this responsibility to get the bill passed of ratifying the governor's actions, that would be pretty bad, wouldn't it?
It would probably go down in the books, yes,
It could. You could make history with this.
Not looking to make history.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just kind of want to make sure.
There are a lot of executive order numbers and code sections. Does anybody have any questions about any of those?
Would not take us till Monday, probably late Tuesday afternoon, to get all our questions answered.
I suggest that what we might want to do is submit written questions to Representative Nimmer, and maybe he can supply written answers by Monday to the committee.
Yes, sir. Be glad to spend the weekend working on that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move do pass.
All right, there's a motion, a second, do pass. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It passes the rules. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
House Bill 339, this is by Chairman John Burns, but he is under the weather this afternoon, and I understand that Chairman Ron Stevens is going to present for him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 339, if you may remember, originally was part of the film tax credit bill. This is the video game industry that is very hard to track and was really out of place with the film industry. So we moved it over to make it a jobs tax credit to make sure we keep these jobs in Georgia. And it's about to sunset, so this begins it again in January 2016. And it ties the interactive game industry directly to Georgia's jobs, which is different than the film industry and the jobs that it creates. There's over 70 companies in Georgia that make these video games, and I believe it's the future of the industry. It provides that studios may not draw more than provides that the studios may not draw more out of the credit fund than they invested in the previous year's payroll. It requires that studios be physically located in Georgia. It caps the total fund at $12.5 million for 2016, $12.5 million for 2017, and $12.5 million for 2018 on a first-come, first-served basis. Caps the individuals' companies from drawing more than $1.5 million per year so that one big one can't take it all. And like the film tax credit, it affords a 30% credit on the dollar for the investment in these Georgia-based studios. It establishes an audit prior to certification, and it creates a return on investment matrix showing the year of the job growth in the companies using the credit. This is a trackable mechanism. It's worked in the past, and for the first time after this bill's done, we'll give a report on the jobs that have been created in the previous year. And that's the presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Chairman Martin.
Chairman Stevens, a quick question. I know we did something similar to this with a teleworking tax credit bill number of year. When I say something similar, it had caps on taxable years. As this moves forward, since it has a cap, we haven't had any issues reaching the cap thus far?
No. We reached the cap. As far as I know, we reach it every year.
Okay, and there wasn't any problem with fiscal year filers versus calendar year filers. That's all working smooth. I just want to make sure we didn't need to correct anything in there.
We're doing a good job. Jobs are growing in the industry, and companies are coming here.
Yeah, I mean, my question was, I just wanted to make sure that the fiscal year filers weren't not getting equal access to the credit. And I don't have anybody specifically in mind. I just wanted to make sure the credit wasn't running out before.
And that's a good question too. And to make sure that everybody gets a bite at the pie, we're limiting to $1.5 million per company. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stevens, is it not true that these are good paying jobs? These are software engineers and so forth and things like that?
They pay around $100,000 a year, yeah.
Good. And you, my initial question was in regard to the jobs that are created by this. You made allusion to a report that would be available. Would that report be available sometime this calendar year, or do you have any highlights? And my ultimate question is in regard to the number of jobs that we are creating for the credit we are spending.
For the first time on Section D in the bill, we'll be getting a report from the commissioner which highlights those jobs. For full-time employees, 35 hours or more, that are qualified for this interactive credit.
So we'll have one in about 4 months.
June 30th.
Oh, no, next year.
Next year.
Okay.
Chairman Parsons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, just a question on page 3, line 68. A job that requires a minimum of 35 hours a week is under the definition of a full-time employee. I'm just wondering, is that I don't know, is that a standard? I always thought 40 hours a week was a full-time job.
Unless you're a legislator.
Well, unless you're a legislator, yeah. I mean, I'm just really asking, is that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much standard of a full-time week.
Thanks.
Good question.
Yeah, most of the time, most of your human resources folks will tell you for insurance coverage and for retirement benefits, that's a minimum of 30. That's the general rule. Are any other questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a motion and a second. Do pass. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's passed to rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, the last item we have on the agenda is House Resolution 397 by Leader O'Neill, who is on a field trip this afternoon. And so I'm going to ask Representative Peake, if he will, to present this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Resolution 397, we're going to do some urging. We're going to urge Congress to enact legislation to allow states to require remote sellers, those that are without brick and mortars facility inside our state, to collect sales and use tax on internet transactions.
Any discussion or any questions? Representative Peake says he's taking no questions. What's the pleasure of the committee? Is there a second? All right, motion second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is passed the rules. I want to thank members of the committee and everybody for being here this afternoon. As I said, we'll probably have some subcommittee meetings between now and Tuesday, and we will have another full committee meeting on Tuesday, and then that may be the last one before day 30, but we'll see if something else comes up. But our plan right now is to have one more full committee meeting before day 30. So with that said, we are adjourned.